Have you ever wondered what the real reason for Lucifer's fall was? Was it just pride, as we so often hear? Or is there something deeper hidden between the lines of the biblical narrative and the most ancient traditions? Today you are going to step into a setting very different from the palaces of earthly kings. We will travel to the heavens, to a time when harmony was perfect and every star in the firmament seemed to sing in unison. Among cherubim and seraphim, there was an angel who stood out for his beauty, for his wisdom, and for the brilliance that reflected the very light of God. His name was Lucifer, the light-bearer. Tonight you will cross the doors of this mystery. You will behold the lost glory of a being who walked among stones of fire, who carried music within his very being but who chose another path. And step by step you will discover that his fall was not only the result of pride. There was something more, a silent, deep, and dangerous desire that hides behind this cosmic story. Before we dive into this journey, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and activate the notification bell. That way you won't miss any of the upcoming biblical bedtime stories, carefully prepared to bring knowledge and rest to your soul. Now I invite you to lie down comfortably. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. This is your moment of peace. As your mind relaxes, let this narrative gently wrap around you, as if you were crossing the gates of heaven, walking among angels, and witnessing up close the secrets that changed the destiny of eternity. Before the shadow of rebellion, before pride blossomed in his heart, Lucifer was the living reflection of perfection. The scriptures, in their poetic and symbolic language, describe him as an anointed cherub, established upon the holy mountain of God, who walked among stones of fire. This image is not merely a religious detail. It is a window that allows us to glimpse the magnitude of his glory. Imagine for a moment the heavens in perfect harmony. Thousands upon thousands of angels, each with their function, their music, their own brightness. Among them, there was one who stood out, not because he was more loved by the Creator, but because there was in him something unique. His name was Lucifer, and that name in itself carried a powerful identity. In Latin, Lucifer means light-bearer, the one who carries the brightness, who reflects the radiance of God himself. His beauty was indescribable to human eyes. Ezekiel 28, in its prophetic language, states that he was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. His presence was like a dawn that never faded. His voice, according to ancient traditions, possessed the sound of musical instruments, as if the very essence of melody dwelt within him. Some say that every word that came out of his mouth was a song, and every movement of his wings resounded like a celestial symphony. He was not only beautiful, he was also wise. Lucifer's wisdom was not limited to technical or intellectual knowledge. It was wisdom granted by the Creator himself, a profound understanding of cosmic order, of the secrets of worship, of the balance between justice and mercy. His mind shone like a star, capable of guiding, inspiring, and instructing. And more than that, he exercised a role of leadership. Christian tradition describes him as the one who presided over the angelic choirs, responsible for leading worship before the throne of God. Picture this scene. Multitudes of angels, in unison, raising voices of praise, and at the center of this song, a being whose very essence was music, who radiated beauty and light, leading creation in perfect harmony with the Creator. This was the reality of Lucifer. He was not just another angel, he held a position of honor, the anointed guardian cherub, as the prophet describes him. His role was not small. He was near the throne, before the direct presence of God, breathing the atmosphere of eternal glory. If there were a celestial hierarchy, Lucifer was among the highest, so elevated that his fall seems all the more tragic. Close your eyes and imagine the golden glow of eternity reflected upon his garments, the crystalline light of the heavens mirrored in his countenance, and music flowing from his very existence. He needed no instruments, for he himself was an instrument. Every fiber of his being resonated worship, and it is in this contrast that the story becomes so striking, because when we think of the fall, we often forget who he was before. The fall was not merely that of a common angel, but of one who reflected, like a perfect mirror, the glory of God. He was the bearer of light, and that light was not his, it was granted. He shone because he reflected the radiance of the Creator. And here lies a profound detail. Being a bearer of light is a calling to humility. The light did not belong to him. He was not the source, only the reflection. Just as the moon shines only because it reflects the light of the sun, Lucifer shone because he reflected the divine light, and yet at some point, that reflection became unsatisfactory to him. But before the fall there was perfection. In him was found no shadow, no flaw. And perhaps that is why his story fascinates us so deeply, because it reminds us that even the purest beauty can become corrupted when it ceases to acknowledge its true source. Lucifer, the light-bearer, was also the guardian of worship. He had access to secrets no other angel possessed. He was the link between creation and the Creator in the eternal song. The angels looked at him and saw harmony. His wisdom was inspiration. His voice was guidance, his form was perfect, he seemed unshakable. Yet there is a lesson here: created perfection is not the same as the absolute perfection of God. Lucifer was perfect within his created nature, but he was not infinite. He was not God. And it is in this abyss between creature and Creator that the drama began to unfold, which would change the history of eternity. But for now, imagine him before the fall. Imagine the heavens illuminated by his presence. Imagine the angelic choirs following his lead. Imagine the glory reflected in every gesture, in every song, in every ray of light that emanated from his essence. It was splendid. It was magnificent. He was like a beacon of beauty and wisdom in the firmament. This is the portrait of Lucifer before the rebellion. The portrait of a being so exalted that his fall became an eternal symbol of tragedy. For the higher one stands, the greater the impact of the fall. Before the shadow of rebellion darkened the firmament, there was in the heavens a perfect order, a harmony so profound that our human senses can hardly imagine it. Everything was in tune. Every star, every seraph, every cherub, every ray of light reflected a single purpose: to worship and glorify the Creator. There was no dissonance, no friction. It was like a symphony that never ceased, vibrating in waves of peace, beauty, and communion. In this sublime setting, Lucifer occupied a central place. He was not isolated, nor positioned above the others in an authoritarian way, but inserted into a network of relationships that reflected divine love. The angels saw in him a leader, a natural guide in worship, someone whose presence inspired confidence. His brilliance, his wisdom, and his music made him a reference. He was respected, admired, and many were inspired by his light to serve the Creator more faithfully. The divine order was not an oppressive hierarchy. There was no envy among the angels, no struggles for power. Each one knew their role, and all rejoiced in fulfilling it. The seraphim, with wings covering their faces in reverence, proclaimed, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." The cherubim guarded the mysteries of the divine presence. The archangels were messengers of grand decrees, and all in unison found their joy in the same source, standing before the glory of God. Imagine a choir that never goes off key, a melody without interruptions, flowing smoothly through eternity. That was the atmosphere of the heavens. There was no time as we know it, no fatigue, no distance, only perfect communion. Love flowed like a river of light, connecting all created beings to the heart of the Creator. In this environment, Lucifer played a prominent role. He was like the conductor of this great symphony, not because he was superior to God, never, but because his function was to channel worship, to lead the songs, to reflect the Creator's beauty to the entire heavenly assembly. His name Light-bearer made sense in this context. He was not the source but the reflection. He carried the light forward, like a torch that lights other torches, spreading brightness wherever he went. The angels related to one another in perfect unity. There was friendship, there was trust, there was loyalty. And Lucifer, at the center of this fellowship, was admired as an example. He walked among stones of fire, a symbol of divine holiness, and all saw in him a witness of God's love. His closeness to the throne did not inspire jealousy, it inspired reverence. To many he was like an older brother, someone to be trusted. The heavenly environment was filled with indescribable beauty. Imagine gardens of light, crystal seas, paths that reflected divine glory like transparent gold. Imagine voices intertwining like flowing rivers of sound, creating harmonies that surpass any earthly music. In this place, every being lived in complete freedom, but a freedom that did not know disobedience, because love was the law, and love at that time still united all creatures. The Creator was the center, and every angel, every star, every element of creation moved around him, like planets orbiting in perfect order. There was no rupture, no fall. It was peace in its purest expression. Lucifer, within this order, was a shining jewel. His brilliance did not diminish that of others. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify it. When he led worship, the heavenly choirs resounded even more powerfully, as if the entire universe vibrated in a single note. His leadership was not a burden but an inspiration. He did not command by imposition, but drew others by the beauty of his light. This was the atmosphere of perfect worship. There was no obligation, no fear. The angels did not praise because they had to. They praised because they desired to, because their very essence pulsed with worship. Every gesture was spontaneous, every word sincere, every song genuine. Harmony was not imposed, it was natural, and perhaps it is precisely this that makes the rebellion so incomprehensible. How could discontent arise in such a perfect setting? How could Lucifer's heart, surrounded by so much beauty, filled with such wisdom, immersed in the Creator's glory, turn against this harmonious order? Before that happened, however, heaven was a place where every being reflected light. The atmosphere was one of unshakable trust, flawless communion, unending music. The Creator himself reigned not only with power but with love. And that love was the bond that united all creation. For a moment close your eyes and imagine being in this place. See the fields of light stretching endlessly. Hear the angelic choirs intertwining in gentle melodies. Feel the peace of an environment where nothing threatens, nothing wounds, nothing corrupts. It is difficult even for our minds to conceive. But this was the reality of Lucifer and the angels before the fall. He was there at the center of this splendor. He breathed this peace, reflected this glory, lived this communion, and all saw him as a faithful bearer of the light. It was unimaginable to think that from a heart so full of beauty and music could arise the first sound of dissonance. The celestial harmony was a mirror of the Creator, a perfect reflection of his character. Order, peace, justice, and love. Everything was in its place, and everything pulsed toward the same source, until something began to change in the heart of one of the brightest among them. Amid perfect harmony, where all the angels rejoiced in serving and reflecting the glory of the Creator, something almost imperceptible began to be born in Lucifer's heart. It was not sudden, like a sudden explosion, but slowly, like a small crack that appears in a shining stone. An invisible seed, planted by self-contemplation itself, began to germinate. This seed had a name: pride. Pride did not present itself to him as an enemy. On the contrary, it came as a gentle whisper, as a natural feeling of self-recognition. After all, Lucifer was beautiful, resplendent, perfect in wisdom and beauty. He led worship with grace, radiated light, was admired by the other angels. Why not rejoice in all this? Why not look at himself, and be delighted with his own image? And it was exactly there that the danger began. The one who had been created to reflect the light of the Creator began to look not at the source, but at the reflection. Instead of contemplating God's brightness, he began to lose himself in the radiance he saw in himself. Little by little, he forgot that his light was not his own, but borrowed. The prophet Ezekiel describes this transition poetically. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. Ezekiel 28. Notice the words: there was no flaw, no evil. He was perfect, but something was found in him. Iniquity was not placed from outside. It was born within. It was the fruit of exaggerated self-contemplation. Isaiah also gives us a glimpse of this process, putting into words the hidden desire of Lucifer's heart. You said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Isaiah 14. See the progression: ascend, exalt, sit, be like. Each verb reveals a step further from humility and closer to arrogance. He, who already had so much, wanted even more. He was not content to be a reflection. He wanted to be the source. He did not accept only to reflect glory. He desired to be worshipped. This is the danger of self-contemplation. When the eyes turn to the mirror, they forget the window. Lucifer, who had been created to be a window of God's light, began to act like a mirror turned toward himself. And the more he saw himself, the more he desired. In the beginning, it may have seemed something small, a passing thought: I am beautiful, I am wise, I am admired. But when vanity is not fought, it takes root. The one who once looked at the Creator began to compare himself with him. He no longer saw only difference. He began to feel rivalry. Pride, like a weed, does not grow alone. It expands, suffocates, takes over. Soon, Lucifer began to desire not only recognition, but autonomy. Not only to be admired, but to rule. The worship that should have risen to the divine throne began to be diverted, even if secretly, toward himself. It is striking to realize how the Bible describes this fall, not in terms of strength, but of heart. It was not defeat in battle that brought him down. It was the intimate, subtle, hidden desire. He fell first within, long before he was cast out. This story teaches us something about the danger of being enchanted with one's own image. When we look too much at ourselves, we lose sight of the source of what we have. All beauty, all wisdom, all talent is a reflection, a gift, not absolute merit. When we forget this, we begin to believe we are greater than we really are. And so in heaven, the first shadow appeared. It was just a thought, a spark, but it was enough to shake eternity. The seed of pride was germinating in the heart of the one least expected, precisely the one who most reflected the light. The other angels may not have noticed at first. After all, Lucifer continued leading worship, continued beautiful, continued shining. Outwardly, nothing had changed. But in the silence of his mind, in secrets that only he knew, the seed was growing. He no longer worshipped only the Creator. He was beginning to worship himself. This is the greatest danger of self-contemplation. It turns blessing into a snare. The same brightness that should glorify God becomes an idol. The same talent that should be service becomes vanity. The same position that should be responsibility becomes ambition. And so it was that Lucifer, the light-bearer, began his path toward darkness. It was not with shouts. It was not with revolts. It was in silence, with thoughts nourished in secret. It was in the reflection of his own beauty that he was lost. It is curious to realize that the fall began with something so subtle. It was not an open denial of God. It was not an explicit blasphemy. It was only a change of focus from God to himself. And that small change made all the difference. Perhaps that is why the biblical texts insist so much on humility. Pride is the root that precedes every fall. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16. What happened with Lucifer is an eternal reminder of this principle. He had everything. And precisely because he had so much, he believed he could have even more. The light-bearer desired the light for himself, and when he tried to hold it, he lost it. If pride was the seed that silently sprouted in Lucifer's heart, the desire for autonomy was the trunk that grew from that root. Pride is looking at oneself with admiration. Absolute autonomy is something more dangerous. It is refusing any submission, even to the Creator himself. In heaven, Lucifer did not want only to be beautiful, admired, or recognized. He longed for total freedom. He wanted to be independent, not only to serve, but to rule, not only to reflect the light, but to be its source. This is the point where vanity turns into rebellion, because as long as he saw himself as a reflection, he was still in his place. But when he wanted to be the sun, he broke the balance of creation. Isaiah helps us see this hidden desire. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Isaiah 14. It was not merely wanting to be close to God. It was desiring to be in his place. The light-bearer wanted to be the very light. This desire for absolute autonomy reveals something profound about the human heart as well. Because Lucifer's story is not just a distant heavenly tragedy, it is also a mirror of our own condition. Since Eden, the serpent has whispered to humanity the same promise: you will be like God. Genesis 3. What seduced Eve was not only the fruit pleasing to the eyes, but the idea of no longer depending, of no longer having to listen, obey, or trust, of being her own source, her own law, her own God. And here lies the connection. The desire for autonomy is in essence the desire to replace God with the self. It is when the creature no longer accepts its place of dependence and tries to take for itself what belongs only to the Creator. Lucifer, in his exalted position, may have begun to think, why must I eternally reflect the light of another? Do I not have enough brightness of my own? Why must I submit, if I have within me beauty, wisdom, and strength? This kind of reasoning, subtle and dangerous, led him to believe he could exist without bowing before the throne. But here is the irony. No created being can fully exist without the source that gave it life. Just as a flame cannot keep burning without fuel, Lucifer could not sustain his glory without the presence of God. His attempt at autonomy was, in fact, his condemnation. This desire for independence does not arise only in heavenly beings. It also pulses in us, human beings. How many times do we seek to live without limits, without rules, without obedience? How many times does the human heart reject the idea of depending on God, of following His will, and insist on tracing its own paths? The original sin was not merely eating a forbidden fruit. It was wanting to live without submission, without a higher authority. It was desiring to be Lord of good and evil. And as with Lucifer, this desire for autonomy distances us from true freedom, because freedom without limits is not freedom, it is slavery. A bird may think it will be freer outside the air, but when it falls to the ground, it loses its essence. A tree may try to pull out its roots to be independent, but in doing so it will die. We were created to live in communion with God. By breaking that bond, we destroy ourselves. Lucifer did not understand this. His desire for autonomy blinded him to the reality that his greatness was a gift, not an achievement. He confused the reflection with the source, and in seeking to be independent, he fell into the abyss of separation. Little by little, this thought became his truth. He began to believe his own illusion. The brightness that emanated from God began to seem like his own brightness, and convinced of this, he began to reject any submission. His rebellion began not with swords, but with a heart that said, I will bow no more. And perhaps this is the greatest danger of the soul, believing it can live without bowing before something greater. This desire for autonomy is what fuels our greatest falls. It is what leads us to resist counsel, to reject limits, to ignore the voice of conscience. It is what makes us believe we can be our own truth, our own law, our own guide. But just as it happened with Lucifer, this illusion always ends in a fall, because no creature can sustain itself alone. We are made to reflect, not to be the source. We are made to receive, not to generate light on our own. Heaven, which once was perfect in harmony, began to feel the tension of this silent revolt. Lucifer's desire for autonomy was not yet openly declared, but it already pulsed in his heart. He no longer looked at the other angels as brothers in service, but as potential subjects. He no longer looked at the throne as the center of worship, but as a place to be conquered. And this change of vision was what opened space for the next step: explicit rebellion. But before that, we need to pause and reflect. How many times do we repeat this same story in our own lives? How many times does the desire for absolute autonomy lead us to reject limits that could protect us? How many times do we turn away from God because we believe we know more, that we can do more, that we do not need Him? This is the great irony of autonomy. It promises freedom but delivers bondage. Lucifer believed he would be exalted, but he was cast into the abyss. Adam and Eve believed they would be like gods, but they lost paradise. We believe we will be happy doing only our own will, but we reap emptiness and frustration. The desire for absolute autonomy is ultimately the desire to live without roots, and every rootless tree is doomed to fall. That is what began in Lucifer's heart. Pride lit the flame, but the desire for autonomy turned it into a fire. And this fire, which began as a spark, would soon consume the harmony of heaven. When the seed of pride and the desire for autonomy germinated in Lucifer's heart, the heavens had not yet been shaken by any open war. Everything still seemed in order. Songs of praise echoed, the angelic choirs continued their routine of worship, and the glory of God still illuminated the whole firmament. But beneath this surface of perfect harmony, an invisible tension was beginning to form, a silence heavy with suspicion and intrigue. The conflict did not begin with unsheathed swords or raised voices. It began in the innermost thoughts. Lucifer, the one who once radiated only light, began to nurture questions that undermined his trust in the Creator. Instead of exalting God's goodness, he began to suspect His authority, and in secret, he began to share these ideas with other angels. At first, they were only subtle insinuations, seemingly innocent comments, but laced with poison. Perhaps he said, "Why does God need to be the center of all worship? Could we not also shine on our own? Or even, if we were created perfect, why must we continually submit? Wouldn't we also be capable of ruling?" These questions, thrown out like small sparks, began to awaken doubts in some hearts. They were not direct attacks, they were suggestions. And that is how rebellion almost always begins, not with shouts, but with whispers. The tension grew. Many angels still looked at Lucifer with respect and trust. After all, he was a leader, a guardian of the throne, a reflection of God's glory. His words, therefore, did not seem dishonest, but wise. When he spoke, his voice still sounded melodious, still carried authority. But now, behind the radiance, there were shadows. Some began to waver. They questioned in silence, wondering if perhaps there was indeed injustice, if perhaps God's glory was restricting the freedom of creation. Others, however, remained faithful. They felt that something was wrong, but did not know how to express it. There was, therefore, a climate of uncertainty, like a sky heavy before the storm. This was the first silent conflict of the universe. There were no visible battles, but there was a war in thought, in trust, in loyalty. God Himself, in His patience, allowed this tension to develop. He did not crush the rebellion immediately. He did not silence Lucifer with force, because love does not impose. Love offers choices, and it was this freedom that gave space for intrigue to spread. Lucifer, increasingly convinced of his own illusions, began to organize his speech. He did not openly say, "I want to take God's throne." That would have sounded too absurd. Instead, he used the language of freedom, equality, justice. Perhaps he whispered, "Why should only one rule? Should we not all be masters of our own destiny? Wouldn't it be fairer that each one be exalted, and not only the Creator?" This kind of reasoning still sounds attractive today. The promise of autonomy, of boundless equality, of absolute freedom. But behind this apparent justice, there was a secret desire to replace God. Meanwhile, the faithful angels looked on with sadness and perplexity. They saw that something had changed in Lucifer's heart, but they still did not grasp the full gravity of the situation. He was still beautiful, still luminous, and his music still enchanted, but there was a different sound in his voice, a strange weight in his words. The silence before the rebellion was perhaps more disturbing than the war itself. It was a silence full of suspicion. Some angels, once united in worship, began to avoid one another, unsure of whom to trust. The atmosphere of perfect harmony was no longer as pure. There were cracks, and these cracks were not visible, but felt. Picture this scene: heaven still shines, voices still rise, but between one note and another, there is hesitation. Between glances, there is doubt. Between former brothers, there is silent division. It is as if eternity were holding its breath, awaiting what was to come next. God, in his wisdom, did not hasten the outcome. He allowed each celestial being to take a stand. This waiting, this patience, was also an eternal lesson. True love never forces, never controls, never manipulates. Each angel would have to freely choose whom to serve. And thus, in the heart of heaven, an invisible line began to be drawn. On one side, Lucifer and those who sympathized with his ideas of autonomy. On the other, Michael and the faithful angels, who stood firm in love and loyalty to God. But for now, this division was still silent. It was like the moment before a great storm. The air heavy, the sky dark, but no lightning yet. The heart of each angel was under test. Trust would be proven. Love would be put to the test. This silent conflict is a powerful reminder that the greatest battles begin within, before they become visible. Lucifer's fall did not begin with open war, but with hidden thoughts, whispered intrigues, sown doubts, and so, heaven waited. Harmony was wounded, but not destroyed. The silence was deep, but about to break. Soon the choices made in secret would become public. Soon the hidden rebellion would reveal itself in open war. If pride was the seed, and the desire for autonomy the trunk that grew in Lucifer's heart, envy was the bitter fruit that ripened from this twisted tree. A silent, burning, yet devastating envy. Not only envy of the faithful angels who remained at the Creator's side, but above all, envy before the divine plan to exalt Christ and to reveal, in the future, an incomprehensible love for humanity. Lucifer, the light-bearer, held a position of honor. He was among those closest to the throne, surrounded by glory, beauty, and authority. But even in this exalted place, he looked at Christ, the only begotten Son, the one who shared the divine essence, and felt a distance he could not accept. It was not enough to be the most splendid among the angels. He wanted to be like the Most High. He wanted to occupy a place that did not belong to him. This is the deepest mystery of envy. It is born not from lack but from comparison. Lucifer lacked nothing. He was perfect in wisdom, beauty, and authority. But when he compared himself to Christ, he realized he could never be what he was. Christ was not a creature. He was God himself made visible expression. Lucifer could not bear this reality. Here enters the greater tension. The divine plan to save humanity, still hidden in mystery, began to be unveiled before the angels. God in his wisdom revealed that his love would not be limited to heaven, but would extend to fragile beings made from the dust of the earth. And not only that, Christ the Son would be exalted as the center of this plan of redemption. He would become man, humble himself, and die for seemingly insignificant creatures. For Lucifer, this was incomprehensible. How could the Creator, source of all glory, love such inferior beings so much? How could the Son lower himself to the point of taking the form of a creature? This love irritated him, because it revealed something he did not possess: humility. Envy intensified. He looked at Christ and saw not only glory, but something he could not imitate: the ability to empty himself, to give himself, to humble himself. For Lucifer's proud heart, this was unbearable. He longed to be exalted, never humbled. He longed to be worshipped, never to serve. And seeing the beloved Son, placed as the center of the divine plan, corroded him from within. This is an irony that echoes to this day. What most disturbs the envious heart is not the absence of gifts, but the presence of a greater purpose in another. Lucifer did not want only to shine, he wanted to extinguish Christ's light. He did not want only to be exalted, he wanted to bring down the one who was the very reflection of God. And then came the jealousy toward humanity. For in revealing his plan, God showed that he would create beings in his image and likeness, endowed with freedom, capable of loving and choosing. Creatures who, though fragile, would be loved in an incomparable way. This wounded Lucifer's heart even more. How could the Creator direct so much affection to beings of dust when there were glorious angels, perfect in wisdom and power? This love made him jealous. He did not understand that God's love is not based on merit or greatness, but on grace. That true glory is not in being served, but in serving. He who had so long contemplated the light, did not understand the essence of the love that illuminated all things. And so envy became a flame. His revolt was not only against God's authority, but against his love. He wanted to be worshipped, but did not want to love. He wanted to rule, but did not want to give of himself. And so he could not accept the divine plan. Jealousy took over his heart, and from there his rebellion gained new strength. It was not only for the throne, but also against the greater purpose the Creator had revealed. This episode teaches us something profound. Often, what most awakens envy in us is not another's wealth or beauty, but the purpose they carry. We can endure someone being more intelligent or talented, but when we see that their life has meaning, that their path reveals something greater, we feel the weight of comparison. This was exactly what happened with Lucifer. He could not bear to see that Christ would be exalted as the center of the divine plan, and that humanity, though fragile, would have a special place in the Creator's heart. Heaven, once full of peace, became the stage of a silent dispute. On one side, the exaltation of Christ as the beloved Son. On the other, Lucifer's resentment, who could not accept this reality. Jealousy consumed him, and his light no longer reflected the glory of God, but the shadow of his own ambition. This conflict was not only about authority, it was about love, because in the end what Lucifer rejected was divine love, both the love that gave itself in Christ, and the love that extended to humanity. He did not understand that greatness lies in serving, that true power is in humbling oneself, that victory is achieved through sacrifice. And here is the parallel with humanity. How many times do we reject love because it requires humility? How many times do we despise grace because it reminds us that we are dust and not gods? How many times do we envy those who in their simplicity seem to carry a greater purpose than we do? Envy was therefore the fuel of rebellion. Lucifer not only wanted to be independent, he also wanted to usurp Christ's place, to destroy God's plan of love, and to reign alone. And so, heaven awaited the inevitable outcome. The war had not yet begun, but the heart of the battle was already defined. After pride took root in his heart, after the desire for autonomy consumed him, and after envy for the divine plan burned like a flame, Lucifer could no longer keep his thoughts in silence. What began as a hidden seed, and later as subtle murmurs among a few, had now become an open call, not yet against God in direct words, but against the established order in heaven. The light-bearer, who once reflected divine glory, now spread darkness disguised as brightness. But how could he convince perfect angels, created in purity and loyalty? How could he deceive beings who daily beheld the face of God? Lucifer knew he could not present himself as an enemy of the Creator. His speech needed to sound just attractive, almost convincing, and that is exactly what he did. He began to speak about freedom, freedom not as a divine gift but as the absence of limits. He spoke of submission to God's throne as a kind of prison, a restriction on the true greatness of the angels. His words resonated softly, but carried venom. Perhaps he said, "Why must we serve eternally? Were we not created with wisdom and power? Why live under orders when we can rule ourselves?" This was the essence of his deception, turning obedience into oppression, and rebellion into liberation. The discourse of false freedom still echoes in human history. The idea of breaking limits, of living without rules, of being absolute master of one's own destiny, always sounds attractive. But behind this invitation lies the same illusion, autonomy that promises glory, but delivers ruin. Lucifer, master of words, used his natural influence. He was admired, respected, and many saw him as a guide. When he spoke, his voice sounded like music. His arguments were persuasive, his logic seemed coherent. And thus slowly, he won sympathizers. Not all but a third of the angels, according to the vision of Revelation, let themselves be seduced. The deception was not established immediately. Many angels listened, hesitated, and some rejected it. But the power of questioning was enough to plant doubt. And doubt, when not confronted, opens space for a fall. Lucifer used a strategy well known to us on earth, that of the half-truth. He did not openly deny God's glory, but insinuated that this glory limited others. He did not say he wanted the throne, but suggested that everyone should have the right to it. He did not present himself as Christ's rival, but questioned, why should only he be exalted? Are we not all equally worthy? Thus deception was born, not as a crude lie, but as a subtle distortion, not as open blasphemy, but as doubt planted in silence. And heaven, once full of peace, now experienced division. Among the angelic choirs, there were glances of suspicion. Among former brothers, there was separation. Some already declared themselves on Lucifer's side, others remained faithful to God, and many still wavered confused between the two voices. This scene is profoundly symbolic. It shows us that true war begins in words, in thoughts, in discourses that seduce. Lucifer's first weapon was not the sword, but language. His rebellion was born from the rhetoric of false freedom. Heaven became the stage of a choice. On one side, truth, the freedom that exists in obedience to the love of God, which does not oppress but liberates. On the other, illusion, the promise of freedom without limits, which in practice would become slavery to the ego. Each angel had to decide, and many were ensnared by the deceptive brilliance of the light-bearer. This is the birth of deception, when truth is distorted just enough to appear as something better, but at its core carries destruction. It is the same deception we see in Eden, when the serpent promises knowledge but delivers death. It is the same we see in human life, when the pursuit of autonomy drives us away from the true source of life. Lucifer's call to rebellion was therefore an invitation to a new kingdom, but an empty one. He presented himself as a liberator, but became a tyrant. He promised glory, but would bring shame. He promised life, but led to the fall. And yet many followed him, not because they were blind, but because they chose to believe the more pleasant promise. It is always easier to believe what exalts the ego than what demands submission. At this point, the silence of heaven was no longer just tension, it was a forewarning of war. The rebellion, once hidden in thoughts and whispers, was now taking form. The angels were dividing. The atmosphere of perfect worship was no longer the same. The eternal melody was no longer in unison. There was dissonance. There was rupture. But the deception would not last forever. For soon Lucifer's intentions would be clearly revealed. His mask of liberator would fall, and the silent conflict would become an open battle. Silence could no longer be sustained. The doubts sown, the intrigue spread, and the discourse of false freedom had matured. A third of the angels took their stand at Lucifer's side, believing in his promises of autonomy and equality. The rest remained faithful to the Creator, under the leadership of Michael, the prince of the heavenly hosts. And thus what began as whispers turned into cries. What was once only tension became confrontation. The book of Revelation describes this scene with powerful images. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was their place found any longer in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast down to the earth, and his angels were cast down with him. Revelation 12. Imagine the scene. Heaven, which once was only music and light, now became a battlefield. Not a battle as we know it, with swords of iron or spears of steel, but a spiritual confrontation, where truth faced lies, where light confronted darkness, where loyalty fought against rebellion. Michael, whose name means "who is like God," led the faithful angels. His very name was a response to Lucifer's pretension. While the light-bearer wanted to be like the Most High, Michael proclaimed by his existence that no one is like God. He became the banner of faithfulness, the voice of loving submission, the strength that upheld the heavens in the face of rebellion. On the other side, Lucifer, now no longer the light-bearer, but dragon, serpent, accuser. His beauty was stained by pride, his music distorted by envy, his leadership corrupted by ambition. Even so, he was not alone. Multitudes of angels followed him, captivated by the deceptive glow of his promise. They believed they were fighting for freedom, but they were about to experience defeat. The clash was inevitable. Heaven resounded no longer with songs, but with voices in conflict. It is difficult to imagine how such a battle unfolded. It was not only strength, but conviction. It was not only power but faithfulness. Each angel had to decide, not only with his wings but with his heart. The scene described in Revelation is clear. The dragon and his angels did not prevail. The rebellion, however numerous it was, could never defeat the Creator. The fight was not between equal forces, but between eternal truth and passing lies. And like every lie, it could not withstand the clarity of light. The result was the fall. Lucifer, now transformed into Satan, adversary, enemy, was cast out, together with those who chose to follow him. Heaven no longer had a place for them. Harmony was restored, but at the cost of a painful separation. Those who once sang songs of worship now fell like extinguished stars, stripped of their brightness. Picture this scene. Angels once resplendent, now hurled down, crossing the skies in their fall. The firmament, which once resounded in unity, witnessing in silence the inevitable judgment. The light-bearer transformed into Prince of Darkness. What began as a promise of freedom became exile. What began as a search for glory ended in defeat. But the war in heaven was not just a distant episode, it was also the beginning of a new stage in the history of the universe. For in falling, Satan did not leave behind his ambition. He did not abandon his intention to deceive, to destroy, to usurp, cast to the earth. He now turned his eyes to human creation, to repeat among us the same deception he spread among the angels. What this battle teaches us is that faithfulness is not merely a matter of beauty or power, but of choice. The angels who remained with Michael did not do so because they were stronger, but because they trusted in God. Their victory was the fruit of loyalty, not of force. And this echoes in our own lives. The true battle always begins with trust. The fall of Lucifer and his followers marked the birth of conscious evil in the universe. Not because God created it, but because a creature chose to reject the light. And that choice had cosmic consequences. Heaven was purified, but the earth became the stage for the continuation of this war. And here is the reflection. The war in heaven did not end at the moment of the fall. It continues, invisibly, in every human heart. The same lie that seduced angels still echoes among us, the promise of autonomy, of limitless freedom, of glory without submission. Even today the dragon whispers, "You will be like God." Even today the struggle between truth and lies unfolds not in heaven but within us. Yet the end of the battle is already written. Just as in the beginning the dragon did not prevail, so also in the end he will not prevail. Victory belongs to the one who is faithful, to the one who is the very light, to the one whose name is above every name. Thus the war in heaven is more than an epic story. It is an eternal reminder that pride leads to a fall, that lies never withstand truth, and that faithfulness is the greatest power there is. Heaven, which once vibrated in perfect harmony, had witnessed an unprecedented event. The first conflict, the first rupture, the first battle between light and darkness. And when the dust of that war settled, the result was clear. Lucifer and his followers did not prevail. The light-bearer no longer had a place among the angelic choirs. The anointed guardian cherub no longer walked among the stones of fire. The one who once reflected the Creator's glory was now cast far away, thrown out of heaven. But what does it mean to be cast out? It was not merely a change of place, like someone expelled from a palace or a kingdom. Lucifer's exile was also a loss of identity, a transformation of essence. He was not only removed from heaven, he was torn away from communion, separated from the source that gave him light. The light-bearer ceased to carry brightness and began to bear shadows. The fall was, above all, spiritual. He did not lose only his position, he lost the reflection of the glory that emanated from God. The radiance that made him a star was extinguished. His music, once a gentle melody, became dissonant noise. His wisdom, once a source of inspiration, was now twisted into deception. The name that meant light was exchanged for another, Satan, the adversary. This transformation is profound, because when we turn away from the source of life, we do not remain neutral. Whoever turns away from light inevitably embraces darkness. Whoever refuses love ends up consumed by hate. Whoever rejects truth becomes a prisoner of lies. This is what happened to Lucifer. By refusing dependence on the Creator, he did not become independent, but an enemy. He did not become self-sufficient, but empty. He did not become a god, but an accuser. The spiritual weight of this change is immense. Lucifer could no longer behold the divine presence without feeling pain. The same radiance that once filled him with joy now burned him like fire. The light he once reflected became for him a reminder of his fall. The worship of the faithful angels was no longer music to his ears, but a constant sentence of his defeat. And he was not alone. Along with him fell the angels who had believed in his promise. Multitudes who exchanged truth for lies, faithfulness for rebellion, glory for exile. These became his allies in darkness, transformed into demons, sharing in his same condemnation. The fall was not only of one being, but of a legion. Picture the scene: falling stars, not in beauty but in tragedy. Angels who once shone now hurled down like extinguished sparks. The firmament which once resounded in harmony now held the memory of an absence. Heaven was purified, but the loss was real. To be cast out meant losing not only a place but a home. Heaven was not just scenery, it was communion, it was nearness to the Creator, the source of life. And now, separated forever, Lucifer and his followers discovered the true meaning of emptiness. The fall was the birth of the abyss. This abyss is not only physical distance, but spiritual. It is the sense of being eternally separated from that which gives meaning to existence. It is to live in constant opposition, in eternal hostility. What was once joy becomes resentment. What was once light becomes darkness. What was once praise becomes blasphemy. Thus Lucifer became Satan, not only by a new name but by a new identity. He is now the adversary of God, the accuser of his children, the deceiver of nations. His purpose is no longer to reflect glory, but to destroy it. No longer to lead worship, but to divert hearts. No longer to serve the light, but to extinguish it. And here lies the spiritual weight of this transformation. When he fell, he did not fall alone. He dragged with him the desire to ruin humanity. His rebellion did not end in heaven, it merely changed its stage. Expelled from the divine presence, he turned his eyes to earthly creation, desiring to spread within it the same deception that had already destroyed so many angels. Eden would be his new battlefield. The fall of Lucifer is also a warning for us, because it shows that the greatest tragedy is not losing power, beauty, or position. The greatest tragedy is losing communion with God. It is turning away from the source of life. It is exchanging light for shadow, truth for lies, love for vanity. The abyss of the fall was not his alone, but of all who followed him. What was harmony became dissonance. What was trust became suspicion. What was communion became exile. And thus was born the kingdom of darkness, not as God's creation but as the consequence of rejecting him. This episode echoes to this day, for whenever the human heart refuses to bow before the Creator, it experiences a portion of that same abyss. Whenever we choose autonomy without love, pride without humility, freedom without limits, we recreate the fall within ourselves. The emptiness we feel far from God is a reflection of what Lucifer experienced when he was cast out. But there is also hope. For if the fall was real, Christ's victory is too. The same revelation that describes the defeated dragon also describes the victorious Lamb. And just as the abyss was opened by rebellion, the bridge over that abyss was built by love. Cast out of heaven, deprived of divine communion, and transformed into an adversary, Satan did not abandon his desire to usurp and corrupt. Heaven was no longer his home, but earth became his new battlefield. The same deception he used to seduce the angels he would now apply against humanity. His goal was clear: to stain God's masterpiece of creation, to drag into the same abyss of the fall those who had been formed in the image and likeness of the Creator. It is in this setting that we find the serpent in Eden. The garden was perfect, full of harmony and beauty, a reflection of divine goodness. Adam and Eve lived in innocence, in full communion with God, without fear, without shame, without guilt. It was a glimpse of what creation was meant to be. But to Satan's corrupted heart, this place was a painful reminder of all he had lost. Eden was the antithesis of his exile: peace, light, love, and precisely for that reason it became the target of his attack. The serpent appeared as a disguise. Satan could not present himself in his form as dragon, accuser, and fallen being, because he would have had no credibility. He needed subtlety. Just as in heaven he used the half-truth, in Eden he would use cunning. He approached Eve gently, as one who did not threaten, but questioned. And his discourse once again was the same as in his own fall: the promise of autonomy. Did God really say, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? Genesis 3. The question was not innocent. It was a seed of doubt, similar to those he had sown among the angels. Then came the distortion: "You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3. Here is the perfect parallel. In heaven Lucifer desired to be like the Most High. On earth he offered the same illusion to Eve, to be like God. The rebellion was repeating itself, no longer among angels, but among humans. The desire for independence, not to submit, not to depend, was now being sown in the heart of humanity. Eve listened, and like the deceived angels, she allowed herself to be seduced by the promise of freedom. The fruit seemed pleasant, desirable, able to give wisdom. It was not just physical hunger, but hunger to be more. And so the first human disobedience was born. Adam, in silence, shared the same error. The couple that should have reflected God's image chose instead to reflect the adversary's rebellion. They ate the fruit, and suddenly their eyes were opened, but not to glory, rather to shame. What seemed like enlightenment became darkness. What seemed like wisdom became a burden. What seemed like freedom turned into slavery. This is the reflection of the fall on earth: the same lie, the same deception, the same false promise of autonomy that seduced the angels now seduced humans. Heaven had been stained by Lucifer's rebellion. Now the earth was stained by his influence. And what was Satan's desire? To corrupt God's creation. He could not defeat the Creator directly, but he could strike at what God loved most. Humanity, made from dust, but carrying the divine breath, became the target of his envy. Every human being is in some way a reminder of what he lost: closeness, light, communion. By corrupting man and woman, he indirectly wounded the heart of the Creator. It is important to see that Adam and Eve's sin was not simply eating a forbidden fruit. It was repeating Lucifer's error, desiring to be like God. The fruit was only a symbol. The true temptation was absolute autonomy. And just as it happened with the light bearer, the promise resulted in a fall. The consequences were immediate. Eden was no longer a place of innocence. The couple, once naked and unashamed, now hid. The garden, once a place of peace, was now a scene of fear. Creation, once harmony, now felt the weight of corruption. The reflection of the celestial fall spread across the earth as an inevitable shadow. And still today that reflection repeats in us. The same deception lives on: the idea that we can live without limits, without submission, without obedience. The serpent's voice still whispers, "You can be your own master. You don't need God. You can be like him." And like Eve, many times we choose to believe it. Satan's desire remains the same: to corrupt, to distort, to drag into the abyss. He cannot extinguish the Creator's light, but he can try to dim the light reflected in us. He cannot destroy God's essence, but he can try to destroy the image of God imprinted on humanity. This is the weight of the story. Lucifer's fall was not his alone. It was reflected on earth, contaminating the human heart, spreading as a painful inheritance. The war that began in heaven now takes place in our own lives. But there is also a reminder of hope. If the fall brought shadows, the divine promise brought light. From Eden, God announced that the serpent would have its head crushed by the seed of the woman. Genesis 3. Even in the midst of the fall, there was already the promise of redemption. The reflection of rebellion would not be the last chapter. When looking at Lucifer's path from splendor to the abyss, we realize that his fall was not the result of a single isolated mistake, but of a combination of inner forces that fed each other. Pride, absolute autonomy, and envy did not walk separately. They intertwined like three strands of the same rope, which, when bound together, dragged the light-bearer into darkness. Pride was the seed. It was born in silence, when Lucifer began to contemplate his own beauty and wisdom without recognizing the source from which they came. Until then, his light was a reflection of divine glory, like the moon that shines only because it receives the brightness of the sun. But by looking too much at himself, he began to delight in his own reflection. Pride is always that first deviation, trading gratitude for vanity, turning gift into merit, and present into conquest. From that seed sprouted the desire for absolute autonomy. Pride alone could have been restrained by humility, but it gave rise to the ambition to be independent. Reflecting was no longer enough. Lucifer wanted to be the source. Receiving orders was no longer enough. He wanted to give his own. Being a creature was no longer enough. He wanted to be creator. This desire is perhaps the most dangerous point of any fall, the refusal to submit. For whoever rejects the limits of dependence inevitably breaks with the love that sustains them. And when pride and autonomy were already established, the third force appeared: envy. Lucifer could not bear to see that Christ, the Son, would be exalted as the center of the divine plan. He could not endure the idea that humanity, so fragile and small, would be the object of so much love. Envy does not arise from lack, but from comparison. Lucifer had everything, but when he looked at Christ and the Creator's love, he felt diminished. And this jealousy corroded what little light was left in his heart. These three faces formed the same fall. Pride swelled his heart, autonomy distanced him from communion, and envy put him in opposition to love. Each force fed the other. Pride said, "I deserve more," Autonomy whispered, "I need no one." Envy cried out, "I will not accept that another has what I do not." And so the angel of light became prince of darkness. Here lies a profound reflection. Because these three forces are not just stories about angels, but human experiences. How many times do we fall for the same reasons? How many times does pride prevent us from recognizing that everything we have comes from God and not from ourselves? How many times do we seek absolute autonomy, refusing limits, rejecting counsel, wanting to be masters of our own truth? And how many times does envy corrode our hearts, not because we lack something, but because we cannot stand to see others exalted, loved, or happy? These three forces are like subtle poisons. Alone they are already destructive, but together they create the perfect environment for a fall. Pride blinds us, autonomy isolates us, and envy poisons us. And just as happened with Lucifer, when we allow these feelings to dominate our hearts, we cease to reflect light and begin to carry shadows. Philosophically, we can say that pride is the exaltation of the self, absolute autonomy is the illusion of self-sufficiency, and envy is the denial of love. Spiritually, they represent the opposite of the divine character. God is humble because he gives of himself. He is relational because he lives in communion, and he is love because he does not envy but celebrates. Lucifer chose the opposite in every aspect, and that choice cast him into the abyss. It is also important to understand that this combination does not destroy only individuals, but relationships and communities. Pride separates, autonomy divides, envy corrodes bonds. In heaven they broke the harmony of angels. On earth they break families, friendships, societies. They are forces that, when not restrained, always produce a fall. But here also lies the lesson. If these three forces were the roots of the fall, their opposite virtues are the roots of elevation. Humility, which recognizes that everything comes from God. Obedience, which accepts dependence as an expression of love. And gratitude, which celebrates the good in others instead of envying them. These are the three faces of restoration. Looking at Lucifer, we learn not only about his tragedy, but about the risk we carry within us. Because the same temptation of pride, autonomy, and envy repeats itself daily in our hearts. Every time we forget that we are reflections, every time we seek to live without limits, every time we envy another's brightness, we repeat in miniature the cosmic fall. And yet we have the chance to choose differently. The Creator, who allowed the rebellion so that love might be free, also offers us the freedom to follow another path. Each day we can choose humility instead of pride, communion instead of isolated autonomy, and gratitude instead of envy. Thus, when we recap the real motivations for the fall, we see that it was not just pride, nor just autonomy, nor just envy. It was the sum of them, the intertwining of forces that distorted truth and destroyed light. Lucifer's drama is an eternal warning. The greatest falls begin within, not in the outward act, but in the heart. And perhaps that is why this story still echoes so strongly in us. Because deep down, we know that the battle between light and darkness continues in every choice we make. The fall is not just a past event, it is a present risk. And victory does not lie in our strength, but in keeping our eyes fixed on the true source of light. Lucifer's fall may seem at first glance like a distant episode, a celestial drama that has nothing to do with the lives of ordinary people. A conflict between angels, a mystery lost in the depths of eternity. But when we look closer, we realize that this story is also a mirror, because the same feelings that led the light-bearer to ruin still echo within the human heart. Pride, the desire for absolute autonomy, and envy are not just memories of the past. They are forces that accompany us in the present, shaping choices, corrupting relationships, drawing us away from the light. Modern pride may be one of the clearest expressions of this echo. It no longer presents itself in the language of angels, but in everyday phrases: "I don't need anyone. I am enough by myself. My life, my rules. We live in an age that exalts self-sufficiency, that values appearance more than essence, external shine more than inner source. Just as Lucifer was captivated by his own reflection, many today delight in their image, whether on social media, in professional success, or in personal achievements. It is the same mirror that once diverted the attention of the angel of light, now reproduced in human screens and shop windows. Pride is treacherous because it disguises itself as virtue. We call confidence what is often mere vanity. We confuse self-esteem with exaltation. We celebrate personal glory without realizing that every light we carry is a reflection of the Creator. And when we forget this, we fall into the same mistake as the first rebel, turning gift into merit, present into conquest, grace into vainglory. But the echo does not stop there. Just as Lucifer's pride gave rise to the desire for autonomy, so too does this force manifest in us. The yearning for absolute autonomy is present in our culture in an almost irresistible way. We are taught to believe that true freedom means absence of limits, absence of rules, absence of submission. The serpent's discourse still lives, "You shall be like God." This idea echoes in our thoughts whenever we reject counsel, ignore warnings, or insist on walking our own path even when we know it leads to ruin. Autonomy is in itself a good thing. We were created with freedom of choice. But when that freedom is confused with total independence, it becomes an illusion. Just as Lucifer believed he could exist without the source, so too do we often believe we can live without God. And the result is always the same: a fall. Perhaps that is why so many hearts today experience emptiness. Because we try to live disconnected from the source of life, like a tree that pulls its roots from the soil. At first, there may still be leaves, still be green, but over time withering becomes inevitable. Without roots, there is no life. Without God, there is no fullness. And then, as if pride and autonomy were not enough, comes the third echo: envy. Lucifer envied Christ's place and God's love for humanity. We envy one another. We compare ourselves endlessly. We desire not only to be happy, but to be happier than others. Not only to prosper, but to prosper more than the neighbor. Not only to have, but to have what others possess. Envy is insatiable because it does not feed on what we have gained, but on what we lack. It looks outward instead of inward. And how it corrodes the human heart. It is envy that destroys friendships, divides families, and causes resentment in entire societies. Just as it corroded Lucifer's heart, it also slowly transforms us into adversaries of one another. These three echoes, pride, autonomy, and envy, are like a triangle that traps our soul. They feed on each other. Pride makes us believe we deserve more. Autonomy makes us reject any limit that reminds us of our condition as creatures. Envy makes us despise another's happiness, and together they draw us away from the light. But the most striking thing is to realize that, just as it happened with Lucifer, these human falls almost always begin in silence. They are not immediate scandals, not sudden tragedies. They are subtle thoughts, small choices, almost imperceptible deviations. Pride is born from a prolonged gaze in the mirror. Autonomy blossoms in an unspoken desire to live my way. Envy arises in an innocent comment, in an insignificant comparison. But if not contained, they grow. And when they grow, they bring us down. That is why Lucifer's fall is also a mirror of the human soul. We do not look at his story merely as distant spectators, but as attentive learners, because each one of us carries within the possibility of repeating, on a smaller scale, the cosmic drama. The same temptation that ruined the angel can ruin us, the temptation to forget that we are reflection, and to believe that we are source. Deep down, all human sins are variations of these three faces: pride that blinds us, autonomy that isolates us, envy that corrodes us. They are the invisible pillars of our greatest falls. To recognize them in ourselves is the first step to overcoming them. But there is also hope in this reflection, because if the echo of the fall resounds in our hearts, so too does the promise of redemption. Christ, exalted in heaven and humbled on earth, triumphed precisely where Lucifer fell. He did not seek pride, but self-emptying. He did not seek autonomy, but submission to the Father. He did not feel envy, but offered love. His life is the perfect counterpoint to the fall. He shows us there is another way. Thus, when contemplating the echo of the fall in us, we should not only feel fear or guilt, but also awaken to choice. Because if the fall began in Lucifer's heart, restoration can begin in ours. With every decision, with every thought, we can choose humility instead of pride, loving dependence instead of isolated autonomy, gratitude instead of envy. That is the call of the story, that we do not repeat in ourselves what destroyed the light-bearer, that we learn, from his tragedy, to remain connected to the source, that we may be mirrors not enchanted by the reflection, but that always point to the brightness of the Creator. Faced with Lucifer's fall, an inevitable question arises in the human heart. Why did God allow it? If he is omnipotent, he could have stopped the rebellion before it even sprouted. He could have silenced pride the instant it appeared, could have crushed autonomy before it grew, could have extinguished envy before it became war. But he did not. He allowed the rebellion to run its course. Why? This question runs through the centuries and touches on the mystery of the very relationship between God and his creatures. The answer is not simple, but it begins with a fundamental principle. Love cannot exist without freedom. God could have created angels and humans as machines programmed to obey. With his sovereignty, he could have molded beings incapable of straying, incapable of choosing, incapable of falling. But then, there would be no love. Because love that is not free is not love. It is imposition. The purpose of creation was never merely order but communion. God did not desire only obedient servants, but sons and daughters who would love him from the heart. And that love is only true when there is choice. Saying yes only has value when the possibility of saying no also exists. That is why the rebellion was not crushed immediately. Because by allowing Lucifer to manifest his choice, God showed the universe the value of freedom. He showed that genuine obedience is not born from fear of punishment, but from the desire to remain in love. Free will is, at the same time, the greatest gift and the greatest risk. It gives us the dignity to choose, but also the possibility of losing ourselves. Without it we would be puppets. With it we become beings capable of reflecting the very character of God. For the Creator is love, and love only exists in freedom. And here arises another reflection. Divine justice is not merely punishing evil, but allowing evil to fully reveal itself. If God had destroyed Lucifer immediately, perhaps the angels would not have understood the true weight of sin. Perhaps they would have seen the Creator not as just, but as authoritarian. Perhaps they would have thought freedom was only an illusion. But by allowing the rebellion to develop, God exposed its consequences. He made it clear that every choice contrary to his will results in fall, pain, and destruction. Thus, Lucifer's rebellion was not only tragedy, but also lesson, an eternal warning to the universe that life only exists in communion with the source, that every attempt at absolute independence is self-destructive, that all pride and envy inevitably lead to emptiness. The role of freedom, therefore, is central in eternity. Because it is not enough for the universe to be perfect in order. It must also be perfect in love. And love only flourishes where there is trust, not control. It is only sustained where there is surrender, not imposition. This is the beauty, and at the same time the mystery of the divine plan. The Creator knew that granting freedom would bring the risk of rebellion, and even so he gave it, because he preferred the risk of love to the safety of mechanical obedience. He accepted the cost of seeing some lost so that true love might exist forever. And is this not what we experience in our own lives? How many parents, in loving their children, know they cannot control every step? How many understand that love requires allowing choices, even when they hurt? The Creator, on an infinite scale, chose the same. He let His creatures be free, so that His love would be genuine. By allowing rebellion, God also opened the way to reveal something even greater, His mercy. For if freedom brings risk, it also brings the possibility of redemption. The same free will that allowed the fall is what makes return possible. The same gift that gave Lucifer the chance to rebel is what gives us the chance to choose the light again. Divine justice, therefore, is not hurried. It is patient. Allowing the rebellion was also allowing the universe to understand, with its own eyes, the contrast between darkness and light, between lie and truth, between pride and humility. That is why the Bible says that in the end every knee shall bow, not by imposition, but because it will be impossible to deny the revealed truth. This is the hidden purpose. Eternity will not only be a place without sin, but a place where every being deeply understands why it does not desire sin. A universe vaccinated against rebellion, not because it was forced, but because it learned, in practice, the weight of the fall. Thus, what seemed like divine silence was, in fact, eternal pedagogy. What seemed like delay was love. What seemed like inaction was wisdom. God did not ignore the rebellion. He allowed it so that, in the end, His victory would be complete and unquestionable. Looking at this, we understand that freedom is the most dangerous gift and at the same time the most precious. It is what makes us resemble the Creator, not in power, but in dignity. It is what transforms our obedience into true love. It is what gives meaning to eternity. For a heaven without choice would not be paradise. It would be a golden prison. But a heaven where every voice, every heart, every being chooses to love and remain faithful, that indeed is eternal. Now that we have traveled this long journey, from Lucifer's initial splendor to his fall into the abyss, one truth becomes clear. It was not only pride that brought him down. Pride was the seed. But there was more: the desire for absolute autonomy, the refusal to submit, and the envy of the divine plan intertwined like invisible chains that dragged the light-bearer away from God's presence. It was this combination, pride, autonomy, and envy, that transformed the most beautiful angel into the eternal adversary. This story is not just a distant narrative, lost among the ancient pages of Scripture. It is a mirror, because the same that happened in heaven can be repeated in us. Every time we let ourselves be flattered by the reflection of our achievements, every time we believe we can live without limits, every time we envy another's shine, we repeat on a smaller scale the tragedy of the fall. The echo of the past resounds in our hearts. But we do not need to fear, because if Lucifer's fall shows us the danger of pride, Christ's life shows us the power of humility. If the rebellion reminds us of the destruction of autonomy without love, the Son's obedience reveals to us true freedom. And if envy corrupts us, grace invites us to gratitude. The fall is not only a warning, it is also an invitation to inner vigilance and rest in God. As you hear this story, perhaps your heart feels a mixture of fear and serenity. Fear because we realize that even the most beautiful of angels can be lost when he turns away from the source of life. Serenity, because we understand that by remaining close to God we do not need to fear the darkness. He is the light that never goes out, the presence that sustains, the voice that guides. That is why, as you close your eyes tonight, remember the greatest protection against the fall is not in the strength of the wings, but in the surrender of the heart. It is not in trying to shine by yourself, but in reflecting the light that comes from above. It is not in seeking absolute autonomy, but in resting in the love of the one who created us. Perhaps you wonder, and I, who so often feel pride, who so often desire to be independent, who so often envy others, am I condemned to fall? The answer is no. Because unlike Lucifer, you still have the chance to choose. Every new day is an opportunity to return to the source. Every prayer, a step back toward the light. Every act of humility, a reminder that we do not need to carry the weight alone. And here is the greater mystery. God allowed the rebellion not only to show the price of freedom, but also to reveal the greatness of His grace. Where there was fall, He prepared redemption. Where there was deception, He offered truth. Where there was an abyss, He built a bridge. Christ is that bridge. Thus the story that began with the fall of an angel ends with the victory of the Lamb. The adversary may have been cast to the earth, but his defeat is already written. And we, though fragile, can remain firm if we anchor ourselves in divine love. As you finish this reflection, I invite you to rest in peace. Set aside the worries of the day, the burdens of the mind, the comparisons that generate envy, the thoughts of autonomy that produce loneliness. Just surrender. Breathe deeply. Remember that you do not need to shine alone, because the light that truly matters is not yours. It is God's reflected in you. Imagine for a moment, heaven restored in harmony. The angelic choirs singing in unison, the stars shining in perfect order, the divine presence illuminating everything. This is the final destiny of those who choose to remain in the light. This is the promised eternal rest. And while that day has not yet come, we can live in vigilance. Not an anxious vigilance, but a loving vigilance. To be attentive to the small signs of pride, to the voices that promise false autonomy, to the thoughts of envy that silently corrode. To be attentive not to live in fear, but to remain in love. Because in the end this is the greatest lesson of Lucifer's fall. Eternity will not be sustained by strength, but by choice. It will not be marked by imposition, but by love. A love that respects, that frees, that sustains. A love that needs no rivals, because it is complete in itself. So as you close this story and prepare to sleep, keep this in your heart. The fall was not only pride, it was a set of choices that denied the light. But we today can choose differently. We can choose humility instead of vanity. We can choose loving obedience instead of isolated autonomy. We can choose gratitude instead of envy. And by making these choices even in silence, we reflect something greater. We reflect the very essence of God. Now, breathe deeply. Let the weight of the words turn into serenity. Allow the mystery of the story to bring you rest, not fear. Because despite the fall of the light-bearer, the true light will never be extinguished. Good night. May the peace of the Creator embrace your heart and mind. May you sleep in tranquility, knowing that you are in the hands of the one who overcame all pride, all lies and all darkness. And may your life upon waking be a reflection of the light that never fails.